So thank you for tuning in for the Better Dad Show. I'm your host, Bill Hutchison. You can find the Better Dad Show over at betterdadshow.com. This is episode 12. We've been going for a bit over 3 months, or about 3 months now. The whole reason behind this podcast is that my desire is to become a better dad, better husband, and a better man. Tonight's show is starting late. I forgot it was Tuesday. My parents are visiting from Canada here in Australia, and the time just ran away from itself. So last week, we did talk about the chapter of sex, the topic of sex, and how we address that with our kids, both through how we model, how we approach the opposite sex, how we treat them, as well as what we talk to them about. So the questions for reflection from last week were to discuss with other men in the area in which you have the most difficult struggle in maintaining your sexual purity. How would you feel if your son confessed struggling in that area as well? The second one was to talk to your son beforehand about the changes his body will undergo as he goes through adolescence, as well as those that girls will experience. Then, as he gets a little older, talk about sex, particularly about how a man guards his sexual purity in everyday situations. And also discuss with your wife what measures you can take as a family to keep pornography from impacting your children. Now, last week I did talk about a few of the things that we're doing in our own family that you might want to consider implementing yourself. Otherwise, you can go back and watch that over on the YouTube channel or on betterdadshow.com, where you'll find the video as well as the audio there. If you head over to betterdadshow.com, you can subscribe and find us on all the social media accounts that we are running and go from there so we can connect and talk. This week, we'll be reading chapter 11 of the book by Rick Johnson called Better Dads, Stronger Sons. It's a great book, one that I actually wish I'd read when my kids first gave it to me about 10 years ago. But I'm reading it now with you. Again, one of the reasons why I'm doing it live like this is accountability. So I can actually get through the book. The book was written in 2006, and so almost 20 years ago, but so much of it is still very relevant to what we are now having to address as parents or as dads with our boys now. So we will continue reading chapter 11 now, called Role Models and Mentors. Boys become men by watching men, by standing close to men. Manhood is a ritual passed from generation to generation with precious few spoken instructions. Passing the torch of manhood is a fragile, tedious task. If the rite of passage is successfully completed, the boy become man is like an oak of hardwood character. His shade and influence will bless all those who are fortunate enough to lean on him and rest under his canopy. That was Preston Gilman from Lifetime Guarantee. Boys learn to become men from other men. Masculinity bestows masculinity. Femininity can never bestow masculinity. John Eldredge says, "A boy learns who he is and what he's got from a man or the company of men. He cannot learn it from any other place. He cannot learn it from other boys, and he cannot learn it from the world of women. This requires active intervention in a boy's life by an adult male. Without that intervention in the form of a role model, boys are like ships without rudders, tossed about whichever way the wind and waves of the culture throws them." In her book, Between Mothers and Sons, The Making of Vital and Loving Men, Evelyn Bassoff writes, "When a boy has no flesh and blood men with whom to identify, he may turn to inspiration to the pitiful he-men images of the popular media, like Rambo or Conan. Or they turn to neighborhood gang leaders or criminals whose brutality they mistake for true masculinity. A boy has a void in his soul that asks, 'Am I a man? How will I know?' Writing about the deepest question in a boy's heart, Eldredge again says, 'It's not a question. It is the question, the one every boy and man is longing to ask. Do I have what it takes? Am I powerful? Until a man knows he's a man, he will forever be trying to prove he is one, while at the same time shrink from anything that might reveal he is not. Most men live their lives haunted by that question, or crippled by the answer they've been given. Boys need that void filled by the actions and blessings of other men. A woman can tell her son all day long that he is normal, that his body parts are the right size and shape, and he will never truly believe her. But another adult male, telling him the answer to the question deep in his heart, will be readily and with relief believed. Robert Bly in Iron John says, Only men can initiate men, as only women can initiate women. Women can change the embryo to a boy, but only men can change a boy to a man. Yes, you, Dad, are the biggest factor in making the transformation possible. In his book, Man Enough, Frank Pittman states, masculinity is supposed to be passed on from father to son. Women, no matter how wonderful, no matter how loving, can teach it to us. If we don't have fathers, we should have grandfathers, uncles, stepfathers to raise us from boys to men. If we don't have men in our family, then the need for mentors begins early. If the males we know are the other teenage boys or the macho heroes in the movies, we may get a distorted, exaggerated concept of masculinity. One of the best movies I've seen that illustrates the need for a boy has for an older male in his life is Second-Hand Lions. In one heart-wrenching scene, Haley Joel Osment begs Robert Duvall to stay alive long enough to give him his "what every boy needs to hear to become a man" speech. He doesn't believe he can become a good man until he gets that information from an older, experienced male. That's an excellent movie. Second-Hand Lions. If you haven't seen it yet, I'd highly recommend it. It's really good. Boys who don't receive this blessing from their fathers are deeply wounded. Of course, most men I know deny they have been wounded, just as we are taught to do, but the wounds are there just the same. However, boys who spend time with their fathers or other adult males working, playing, going to ball games, or fishing receive the blessing of masculinity. I was raised by a stepfather. I first met my biological father when I was 24 years old. Since then, we have developed a strong father-son relationship. Last year, I received a Father's Day card from my dad. Like most men, I don't normally care much for greeting cards, but this card was quite special. It grabbed me by the lapels and shook me. The card read, "Son, you're a blessing. You've always been a blessing to the family. You took the Lord into your heart and have grown in his love. Now you do so much to praise him in the way you live and in the things you do. It's been a joy to watch you grow, and this comes with so much pride in the special man you have become." After this reserved, taciturn man wrote, "Rick, always remember, I love you and I'm proud of you, Dad." My dad's blessing meant so much to me, even at the age of 47. Renaissance dads. The word Renaissance means rebirth or revival. When used in conjunction with men, it usually typifies men who have become accomplished in a wide variety of endeavors of life. For instance, some of the most well-known Renaissance men include Michelangelo, an accomplished sculptor, painter, poet, and architect; René Descartes, a philosopher, scientist, and mathematician; Nicholas Copernicus, a lawyer, tax collector, doctor, military governor, judge, vicar general of canon law, and astronomer; and the most famous Renaissance man of all, Leonardo da Vinci, a great architect, musician, engineer, scientist, mathematician, botanist, and inventor who also excelled in human anatomy. Each of these men achieved success, even became experts in several unrelated fields. Successful fathers need to be Renaissance men, but instead of focusing on fields of accomplishment, men now need to reawaken some of the qualities and roles that have made us important figures in the lives of our family and communities, and then intentionally pass those traits on to our sons. It's time to revive the honor tradition of fathering. Today we need to glorify Renaissance dads, men who have become adept at fathering and providing a positive impact on others' lives. These men act in ways that promote the positive view of masculinity and are active role models in the lives of all boys. Only by honoring this type of behavior will we create a desire for young men to follow in our footsteps. I'm a husband, father, son, brother, uncle, nephew, mentor, and friend. I'm also a small business owner, a published author, a public speaker, a ministry founder and director, a basketball coach, a hunter, and a broken-down former high school athlete who still tries to run with the young dogs. I'm accomplished in all these areas and professions with varying degrees of success. Does this make me a modern-day Renaissance man? Probably not, but it might qualify me as a Renaissance dad. As we've learned throughout this book, at the very least it qualifies me as a role model, if for no other reason than by virtue of my gender. But beyond just their gender, true Renaissance dads are also proficient at passing along the breadth of their experience to their sons. Hence, Renaissance dads have three main qualifications. The gender, because only men can model malehood. Only men can model manhood. Their proficiency in what they do as a father, and their breadth of modeling for their sons. As fathers, we are required to be versed in many different aspects of life. Provider, protector, counselor, teacher, coach, friend, mentor, handyman, psychologist, disciplinarian, nurturer, cheerleader, spiritual guide, and banker are all the roles we have to play. How adept we become in those endeavors determines whether we become Renaissance dad role models with great influence or merely shadow figures within our homes. Confident role models. It's interesting when you think of role models and the different people who society lifts up as a role model compared to, what the Bible says and what this book says should be the role models that we have for our kids and how we need to live those up. Even the book talked about the fact that if we don't present quality role models to our kids, then they will look elsewhere for those role models, whether it be Hollywood, which good luck finding a good role model there. The music industry, good luck there. Sports stars, same thing. You need to be the role model for your son, which means that you need to at least be working on getting it all together for yourself so that you can be that role model that your son deserves and needs. So, confident role models. Probably the most important factor in a boy's becoming a good man is the presence of a positive male role model in his life, someone he can look up to. Preston Gillam's quote at the beginning of this chapter emphasizes what it takes to create a productive man, and in doing so identifies the impact men have on boys. Because males are visual creatures, they need to see models and examples of what a man looks like, how he should act in certain situations, and how he carries himself. Fathering is a daunting and complex task. It's complicated by the world we live in, with its increasing expectations, tight economics, and competing pressures. Fathering is also complicated by a man's relationship with his own father, who in many cases was physically absent or emotionally distant. Further complications arise because fathering is a learned skill, one that men aren't typically born with. Without a positive role model early in life, a boy has an extremely difficult time learning how to be a man, father, or husband, or even how to love his wife. A boy needs a father who is confident as a man, feels that he belongs in the society around him, models male spiritual growth, and brings to the son's life a lot of healthy influences. How about you? Are you confident as a man and as a father? At one time, I was not. Before coming to Christ, I was uncomfortable and even intimidated by many situations I found myself in. Of course, I covered it with a false bravado that probably fooled only myself and more than likely just antagonized most everyone I came in contact with. Hence, my effectiveness as a role model for my son was greatly reduced. One of the toughest tasks I faced as a young father was knowing where to find information on fathering and even on manhood. The year 1986 found me anxiously awaiting the birth of our first child. My wife and I waited 5 years after our marriage, ostensibly because I wanted to own a home before having a child. In reality, I think I knew in my heart I wasn't mature enough to handle the responsibility of fatherhood. Our son was 20 days past due and having large shoulders, became stuck in the birth canal. To my shock, the midwife just grabbed him by the head, braced her feet, and popped him out like a champagne cork. Gosh. I was flushed with joy as my son welcomed life with a screaming breath. But on the way home, thoughts flashed through my mind and the cold hand of fear reached in and squeezed my bowels. Wait a second. This is a little more than I bargained for. I don't know the first thing about being a father. What am I supposed to do now? A sobering weight descended upon my shoulders. I knew now I was responsible for an innocent, defenseless life I had helped create. But I didn't know what to do and had no one to go to for advice. I think most men feel this panic when faced with the responsibility of a child. Some cut and run from the panic, and some accept the responsibility. I suspect that most of the ones who run away are the ones who had this behavior modeled for them by other males early in life. That will explain why in some parts of society it's such a just chronic thing within families or within different groups or cultures or subcultures or whatever, that once that parent, that lack of a intact family or lack of a present father just really flows on, and why we as dads need to model how to do it properly, right? So today I find myself with a healthy level of self-confidence, both as a father and as a man. Not that I don't still make plenty of mistakes in both roles, but I'm more comfortable in my skin, as it were. What caused my growth in those two areas? Did I finally reach maturity at middle age? Still waiting for that one. I think it had more to do with consistently asking God for wisdom and actively seeking knowledge wherever I could find it. I read a lot of books and attended many training courses on fathering. I also met with other men who are fathers to discuss trials we all face as parents. I searched out older, more experienced men for their wisdom, and I looked to God's example as the ultimate father for guidance. Mentoring. Boys need role models. They need not only men to model appropriate behaviors, but also men who are willing to actively mentor them. As a father, your primary responsibility to your son is to model the behaviors of positive masculinity and then provide him with the knowledge it takes to become a godly man and father through the mentoring process. Steve Farrar says, "It is my God-appointed task to ensure that my sons will be ready to lead a family. I must equip them to that end. Little boys are the hope of the next generation. They are the fathers of tomorrow. They must know who they are and what they are to do. They must see their role model in action." Boys who grow up without healthy men in their lives face serious disadvantages later on. They have to discover on their own how to become a man, a huge, frightening task. Boys who grow up fatherless and without a positive male role model often end up jobless, godless, and dangerous. Not only do they fail to understand the roles as providers and protectors of their families, but they are afraid to pursue a life of significance. Boys who don't receive male guidance are confused as to their roles in life, never finding security or satisfaction. An important advantage a boy gains from having a male mentor is the ability to pursue the life he was meant to live. Every son wants to gain a sense of mission in life and receive permission from an older male, preferably his father, to pursue the mission, to feel strong, loving, masculine ground beneath his feet, so that he will not, once he's an adult, have to say to his wife, to his children, or to strangers, "I don't know what a man is, please teach me." And such is the dilemma that many boys and young men are facing with today. The prospect of growing up never really knowing what it means to be a man or a father. Your son is truly blessed by your presence in his life. But a boy also needs other men besides his father in his life as role models. In earlier times, all men accepted the responsibility for teaching boys to become men. In fact, in biblical times, the father had the responsibility to find older male mentors for his son as he got older. Michael Gurian said, "When the father was gone, other personnel or tribe members stepped in. When the father wasn't known, other males protected and provided, so the females and children were taken care of, and then, when the young males as a group became of age, mentored them through the social and emotional challenges of mature masculine life." The edict in the Old Testament that if a man is killed, his brother must marry his wife, while hardly palatable in our day, was nonetheless a nurturing strategy required by a society that knew the risks of the lost father. Kids running rampant, single mothers overwhelmed and unprotected, future problems for females who marry the males brought up without fathers. When God decided the time had come for another prophetic voice for the people, he told his prophet Elijah to find Elisha and make him the next prophet. Elijah did that by becoming Elisha's mentor. Initially, Elisha started out by being Elijah's servant. The mentoring process began by just spending time together. It involved just being close to the mentor on a day-to-day basis, observing how he reacted in certain situations. Mentoring involves spending time with your son, but it's also important to reinforce your example with other positive male role models. I involved my son in activities where I knew he would be exposed to positive male role models, such as the Boy Scouts of America leaders, Little League, and soccer coaches, and male teachers whenever possible. I did this perhaps subconsciously because I didn't feel competent as a father and wanted other men to help me in my inexperience. Nevertheless, it ended up being a blessing for my son that I instinctively chose the right thing to do. As he got older, we also got together with a group of other men with sons Frank's age and created a Bible study group meeting once a month for a lesson and breakfast afterwards. It's a really good idea. We went on camping trips, hikes, hunting trips, and other outings together. I wanted Frank to be around a variety of other men to see how they acted, what they said, and how they thought about life. That way, the responsibility did not rest squarely on my shoulders to be the only positive male role model in his life. One thing we need to remember is that nearly all situations and relationships involve mentoring to some degree. If you're a boss and have younger men working for you, you're not only their employer, but also their mentor. Your responsibility goes beyond just teaching them job skills. It should involve teaching them life skills as well. Coaches and teachers have a responsibility to include life lessons in their educational activities. Boys and young men need input from a variety of sources in order to assimilate the information necessary to become healthy adult males. Gurian says, by this phrase, or mentor, we mean a nurturing system, male-driven, in which discipline, morality, teaching, and emotional sustenance are provided by males for males. We mean fathers, male mentors, coaches, teachers, older boys, grandfathers, and other older men, male leaders, male role models, male heroes, male sports figures, and male peers. As men, not only is it our responsibility to find other men to be involved in our sons' lives, it is also our responsibility to be involved in other boys' lives. Children without fathers need men to step forward as positive influences in their lives. Young men without exposure to mature male leadership can become predators. Young women who have been abandoned by their fathers often try to find the paternal love and attention they desperately require in the wrong places, like the backseat of a car. That's, they almost make it a joke on some of the memes that you see on Instagram or on, Facebook, TikTok, whatever, that the number one way that you can encourage your daughter to have respect for herself and to not be someone with a high body count is just as a father to tell your daughter that you love them. And I mean, it's the same for men. If you want your boy to grow up to be a responsible man, you need to be there in his life, teaching him. Now, you also need to be telling your sons that you love them, but it's also teaching them and mentoring them, and so that they can, be positive and aren't predators, and they are actually, someone who's respectful and who benefits society and benefits the men and women who are in their lives. A woman from the Big Brothers Big Sisters organization came to talk to me one day. She was introducing a program called Amachi, which targets adults from faith-based organizations to mentor children who have one or both parents in prison. I told her right up front that I just did not have the time to mentor a young boy. She proceeded to tell me that this program had been in the Portland area for only 2 years, but already had a waiting list of 240 boys between the ages of 6 and 12. Because men were so reluctant to volunteer, the average waiting period for these boys was 2 years. I thought, my goodness, I can't volunteer because I just don't have the time. But Lord, how can I not volunteer? 2 years is a lifetime for boys at that age waiting for a male role model to come into their lives, especially for ones who have recognized the need for and want a mentor in their lives. Knowing that, how could I not mentor a young boy? The 10-year-old boy I mentored is like a dry sponge soaking up my influence. He's respectful and eager for my attention. I'm continually amazed at some of the things he has never been taught because of never having spent much time around a healthy adult male. He's also very angry, and understandably so. He would be abnormal if he weren't angry. He is being deprived of the God-given right to have an older male in his life to help guide him to manhood. Interestingly, both his teacher and his counselor are convinced that he suffers from ADHD, yet around me he is calm and respectful. I don't know if I can or will make any difference in the life of this boy, but I'm trying. If we don't help these boys, who are destined to have a lot of angry, out-of-control young men to contend with someday, as well as a bunch of single moms with fatherless children. Besides, I don't want to have to explain to God someday that I ignored all these boys who needed my attention just because I was more interested in my own needs and desires. Robert Lewis says this about young men today. Boys under 25 in this country are approaching masculine meltdown. Because of a lack of male role models in their lives, they have no idea what a man is, how a man acts, how he feels, or what he lives for. They have no vision of what men do, and many of them are angry. fatherless children or crippled children. In their rage against their fatherless wounds, they often commit acts of violence. Boys without an older male involved in their lives have no accountability. They tend to drift into themselves, into a world of fantasy and isolation. Older men have a responsibility to walk alongside younger men, giving them the benefit of their experience. Likewise, young men should be open, in fact eager, to receive advice from the more mature members of their gender. Too often, however, male pride on both sides stops them from sharing and receiving this crucial information. Find other boys and young men to mentor. Your responsibility does not stop with your son. In fact, the fact is that if we do not curb the multitude of young men entering adulthood without proper training in how to be a man, a father, and a husband, our culture will eventually implode. Truthfully, young men today are desperately seeking older males to tell them the secrets of life as a healthy man in today's environment. If we only knew how important we are in the lives of young men and boys, we would not be so reluctant to step in and give the benefit of our experience. If you think about all of the, your TikTok influencers, your online influencers that are having an impact on young men nowadays, not all of them are very good influences. And our jobs as men in our churches or in our neighborhoods, we need to be, pointing the kids in the right direction, like pointing these boys in a direction that is actually positive and will lead to good outcomes in their lives. Outcomes where they don't isolate themselves from society, isolate themselves from their community, from their church, from women. That we need to be the mentors in that and not let them to be guided by online influencers. Because let's face it, most of the ones that are popular or that people watch aren't exactly uplifting and don't always have a very good message that we want our boys to be listening to. Women make up 85% of single parents in our country. Approximately 50% of the children in this country will live at least a portion of their growing up years in a single parent home. Today, 30% of children are born out of wedlock. Nearly 90% of all violent crime is committed by men raised by single mothers. At least 70% of men in prison are from fatherless homes. These statistics are not an indictment. These statistics are not an indictment of women. They are an indictment of men. We are the ones who have dropped the ball. It's up to us as a collective gender to stop this trend and raise up a generation of men who can lead our society back into the light. As we've seen, we can accomplish this only by spending time with boys and being involved in their lives. I know there's a myriad of reasons why a father may not be involved in his children's lives, especially after a divorce. Some of them are even very good, reasonable, and understandable excuses. I've spoken with many men whose story of divorce and the subsequent struggles broke my heart. However, that does not change the fact that without your influence, your children, especially your sons, will have nearly overwhelming obstacles to overcome if they are to lead productive, happy, and fulfilling lives. And their struggles will likely wreak havoc on those around them, especially your grandchildren. I think that's worth fighting for, and even enduring some difficult circumstances, taking some of those hits we talked about earlier that warrior dads must endure. This is influence, just thinking about the way that society is structured nowadays is, I'm thinking specifically people like FIFO, which is fly in, fly out. Because if you are not always present in your kids' lives and you're gone for 2/3 of a month or 2/3 of the year because you're working, and then you're kind of giving up some of that time where you can mentor your kids. And as a dad, it's always a challenge trying to figure out what is the balance between what we provide financially for our kids. Because, we have to do that, and it's important that we do that. But then also, what do we sacrifice for that? Are we sacrificing our role as a mentor? Are we sacrificing our role as a model for them by doing that? Or are we showing them that the money is more important than the time? Always a challenge, isn't it? To find that balance, right? I can only imagine how difficult it must be to raise and nurture another man's child. But if you're a stepfather, your role is even more important, especially if the boy's biological father is not actively involved in his life. Your stepson needs an older male to show him what it means to be a man. Boys typically have a tough time accepting and bonding with a male other than their father. This makes your task all the harder. One of the nobler things in life that I can think of is for a man to willingly raise someone else's child, provided he does the best he can without malice or contempt. One of the most important, yet possibly most unrecognized men in history was a stepfather. I'm speaking of Joseph, stepfather to Jesus. We don't read much about him in the Bible, and he seems to have disappeared sometime around Jesus' teen years. However, he played a crucial role in Jesus' life, and consequently in all of our lives. Joseph provided protection for the living God in human form. He saves Jesus from being killed as a baby. Joseph provided provision and mentoring to Jesus throughout his early formative years of life. Joseph also raised other men, James and Jude, who became supporters and apostles of Jesus. Joseph played out the role that God had in store for him. It couldn't have been easy, what with Mary becoming pregnant during their engagement. What kind of scorn and peer pressure do you think Joseph faced in this situation, even after the birth of his child he took on as his own? What kind of ridicule would you be subjected to in that situation even today? Even though Joseph seems to have been undervalued and really sort of a footnote in biblical history, I suspect his contributions as a stepfather were greatly honored by God. If you are a stepfather and your boy's father is not a good role model due to alcoholism, drug addiction, philandering, irresponsibility, or any of a dozen other reasons, let your boy know he doesn't have to grow up to be like his father. In the movie The Mighty, the biggest fear of one of the young boys in the story was that he would turn out to be a sadistic criminal like his father. He thought that because his father was a certain way, he was destined to be that way regardless of his own wishes. Many boys do feel this way, and you should let your stepson know he does not have to automatically grow up to be like his father. The biggest contribution you can make to a young man's life is to spend time with him. It doesn't have to be anything special. Just the fact that you are spending your undivided time with him is what counts. Adults think of time in terms of quality. Kids think of time in terms of quality. Over and over again, I hear from teenagers that the one thing they want most from their father is his time. Not money, not material goods, not exotic vacations, just time. My experiences with mentoring boys through organizations such as Big Brothers Big Sisters is that these boys just want your time and attention. They don't care where you go with them or what you do, but they do desperately crave your time together. If you think that you are not important, I encourage you to become a mentor to an at-risk boy. It's a humbling experience to realize that just your very being has a great value to another person. We tend to think that we are not worthy or capable of being a mentor, but that is absolutely not true. Try it. You might be surprised how capable you really are. Heroes. Part of the mentoring process is holding up male heroes for your son. He needs to see what they look like. Heroes need not be famous, larger-than-life action figures. They can be the average guy down the street who gets up every day and goes to work at a job he hates just to support his family. Say this to your son and see what his response is. Occasionally, the newspaper or magazine will have an article about a man who has lived a heroic life or committed an act of heroism. Here are some easy ways to introduce heroes besides yourself to your son's life. Movies. Movies provide a resource for heroes you can use to supplement other sources. Unfortunately, today's movies providing positive male role models are few and far between. Look for movies with men who have good moral convictions and stand for strong values. Enjoy them with your boy. Have a guys' movie night with pizza and soda pop. Remember to talk about the positive character traits the heroes display and the negative ones the villains flaunt. I still get goosebumps watching Mel Gibson as William Wallace in Braveheart. I'm inspired every time I hear him say, "And dying in your beds, many years from now, would you be willing to trade all the days from this day to that for one chance, just one chance to come back here and tell our enemies that they may take our lives, but they'll never take our freedom?" In the movie Unbreakable, starring Bruce Willis, a young boy is so convinced his father is a superhero destined to save people's lives that the father eventually becomes one despite his reluctance. The son's faith in his father empowered him to become what God had destined him to be, a valuable lesson for all men. Here are some more inspirational guy movies. Master and Commander with Russell Crowe, The Last Samurai starring Tom Cruise, The Last of the Mohicans starring Daniel Day-Lewis, The Patriot starring Mel Gibson, Remember the Titans starring Denzel Washington, Hoosiers starring Gene Hackman, Rudy starring Sean Austin, Secondhand Lions with Robert Duvall, Lonesome Dove with Robert Duvall, Glory starring Matthew Broderick, Gladiator starring Russell Crowe, Signs starring Mel Gibson, and We Were Soldiers with Mel Gibson. The movie Rob Roy with Liam Neeson, while perhaps too sexually graphic for family fare, does an incredible job of showing the best and absolute worst character traits that men possess. And, as we know, many of the Lord of the Rings, Star Wars, and Indiana Jones movies are just plain fun for boys and dads too. I provided at the end of this book a list of resources that include some of my favorite movies. Enjoy them. Reading. Somehow we've allowed the myth to circulate that reading is somehow bookish and unmanly. But reading is one of the greatest pastimes I've discovered. If you're reading this book, you know there's something unmanly about if you're reading this book, you know there's nothing unmanly about reading. One of the greatest men in the history of our country, Abraham Lincoln, basically educated himself by reading books. I'm convinced that reading is what separates people who struggle with making poor choices their entire lives from those who have a hope of a bright future. Books, even more than movies, provide a wealth of role models for your sons. Boys are typically not readers. Our culture does not do much to encourage them to be readers. Encourage your son to read. It is a wonderful gift that he will appreciate for a lifetime. Encourage your son by letting him see you reading. Leave books lying around the house. Encourage relatives and family friends whom your son loves and admires, especially other males, to give books as presents. Get your son his own library card at an early age. Let your son make his own choices at the library or bookstore and get involved in his interests. For example, if he likes music, encourage his participation in school or with an instrument. Even if reading is an unpleasant chore for you, I urge you to give books to your son as presents, and not just one book, but 5 or 6 at a time. Start at a young age. Don't wait until he's 6, 7, or 8 years old. Tout the merits of reading to your son, even if you don't enjoy it yourself. Model reading to your son as often as possible. Read in front of him at every opportunity, even if it's just the newspaper. At the very least, let him see you carrying the newspaper, a book or a magazine around with you occasionally. Read stories to him when he's little. Have him read to you as he gets older. I like to read out loud to my wife when I come across something that is particularly insightful. In fact, sometimes I will read aloud entire chapters from books we both enjoy. All the better if the kids are around. They get the benefit of hearing important information from a more credible source than just Dad. Not only that, but it's not a lecture because I haven't directed it towards them. Since I'm reading to their mother, they can more objectively consider the information without the emotional rejection that accompanies a lecture. The trick to helping your son become a reader is to find books written at a level that is not too difficult, yet is sufficiently challenging to be of interest to him. If they are too hard to read, he will become discouraged. It's sort of like the first time I tried to play catch with Frank. He was about 3 years old, and I wasn't smart enough to start out using a tennis ball. I used a hard ball. Of course, the first time I lobbed the ball, it hit him smack dab in the mug. He never really liked baseball too much after that. Don't whack your son in the coconut with a hardball book right off the bat if you want him to enjoy reading for the rest of his life. Remember, his books need to be adventurous, with a swashbuckling dose of action. Stories you'd enjoy too. When you give a gift, give a book that goes along with it. For example, if you give him a basketball, include a book about a famous basketball player. If you give him a baseball glove, give him a book about a baseball star. Whatever his interests may be, dinosaurs, geology, insects, snakes, rodeos, animals, trains, race cars, music, art, ice hockey. Find a book about someone he can look up to in that arena. Eyewitness type of books provide a wealth of information on almost any subject, along with interesting pictures and facts. Books about our founding fathers, pioneers, frontiersmen like Davy Crockett, Daniel Boone, and Lewis and Clark, cowboys like Wild Bill Hickok, Buffalo Bill, Wyatt Earp, or soldiers all the way from ancient times to the present, explorers like Magellan, Francis Drake, De Soto, Marco Polo, Henry Hudson, Christopher Columbus, Leif Erikson, And athletes generally present good role models with the action boys like. Boys crave heroes. Biographies and autobiographies of famous men throughout history also provide wonderful opportunities to learn about the background and character traits of men who have accomplished great deeds. I can still remember as a boy reading biographies about frontiersmen like Kit Carson and Jim Bowie, and sports figures such as Jim Thorpe, Glenn Cunningham, and Jack Dempsey. I've been inspired throughout my life by reading of the challenges they overcame in order to succeed. Recognize that reading for information is as legitimate as reading novels. Acknowledge that fact to your son when he follows written instructions for a hobby or reads the sports pages. Some boys love acquiring facts or trivia and especially enjoy the Guinness Book of World Records, the World Almanac, or sports almanacs just for the fun of browsing through them. Fiction serves to stimulate a boy's imagination, creating visions of adventure and greatness while supplying him with wonderful heroes to look up to. Just a few of the thousands of good fiction books for boys are Where the Red Fern Grows by Wilson Ross, The Red Badge of Courage by Stephen Crane, The Jungle Book and Captain Courageous by Rudyard Kipling, Treasure Island by Robert Louis Stevenson, The Adventure of Huckleberry Finn by Mark Twain, White Fang, Seawolf, and The Call of the Wild by Jack London, The Hobbit and the Lord of the Rings by J.R.R. Tolkien, Robinson Crusoe by Daniel Defoe, The Old Man and the Sea by Ernest Hemingway, The Grapes of Wrath by John Steinbeck, The Lord of the Flies by William Golding, Shogun by James Clavell, American Queen by C.S. Forester, King Solomon's Mines by H.R. Huggard, 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea by Jules Verne, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe by C.S. Lewis, and Endurance by Alfred Lansing. A number of websites and the local library generally have good lists of good books for boys to read. I think as dads too, we need to make sure that we actually check the books that we're going to let our sons read, because as we know, some books in the library that others deem are appropriate for our sons would not be something we want our kids to look at. So it's our responsibility as parents to make sure that they're getting good books, encouraging books, and books that do not encourage degeneracy but actually inspire godliness. So what happened to all of our heroes? Our society craves heroes, yet can't wait to tear them down. Perhaps because of that mentality, we've created a generation of men reluctant to be heroes. Charles Barkley, former professional basketball player, is famous for, among other things, saying, "I'm not a role model." Paul Zweig writes in his book, The Adventurer, The Fate of Adventures in the Western World. By hero, we tend to mean a heightened man who, more than other men, possesses qualities of courage, loyalty, resourcefulness, charisma, and above all, selflessness. He is an example of right behavior, the sort of man who risks his life to protect his society's values, sacrificing his personal needs for those of the community. Virgil's Aeneas is a hero in this sense of the word. He devotes his warrior skills, his pleasures, and finally his life to the historic destiny of founding Rome. Dante climbing to the heaven in the Divine Comedy is a hero. Sergeant York risking his life to end all wars is a hero. There is, of course, another sort of heightened man who bulks large in the popular imagination. He's not loyal, not a model of right behavior. Quite the contrary. He fascinates because he undermines the expected order. He possesses the qualities of the hero, skills, resourcefulness, courage, intelligence, but he's the opposite of selfless. He is hungry, heightened not as an example, but as a presence, a phenomenon of sheer energy. One thing's a certain sports heroes who boast and indulge their whims, who cannot be relied on not because they are treacherous, but because the order of the needs is purely idiosyncratic. More and more, the modern athlete is becoming an anti-hero of sorts. Such figures apparently enjoy the money, fame, and accolades. They just don't have the responsibility that goes along with them. Not having had heroes and role models to look up to when they grew up may very well be the reason. I recently saw an interview with Jim Brown, the great NFL running back from the 1960s. He now works with the young players on his former team, the Cleveland Browns. Brown said, "Most of the young guys on the team, while being very nice, really have little education, and most have grown up without a father. Consequently, they don't know how to handle everyday situations in life. Does it sound as though we all have a responsibility to provide a model for young boys and men? Whether they like it or not, sports heroes and rock stars are role models. What they do and say gets emulated by boys, whether they accept it or not. These personalities can say whatever they want on the television or in the newspaper about not being role models, but it doesn't change the facts. Our sons are watching. Perhaps part of the struggle young men face today is due to the fact that older men have actively and even aggressively abdicated their responsibility as role models. Your son and other boys within your sphere of influence all need your presence in order to become the men God created them to be. They need your wisdom, time, and influence, and the benefit of your experience to make the successful transition from boyhood to noble manhood. In short, they need you to be their hero. So that is the end of Role Models and Mentors, Chapter 11. So there are questions at the end of this one, like there are at the end of most. So questions for reflection and discussion. 1. Think about the best male role models throughout your life. Tell your son about these men and what made them important in your life. 2. Make a list of movies and books you want your son to see and read. Talk to other men and get recommendations of their favorite inspirational movies and books. 3. Actively look for other male mentors to be involved in your son's life. Think about this question. If something would happen to you, what kind of men would you want involved in your son's life? And 4. Discuss with your wife and family how you might become a mentor for other needy boys. So we will leave it there today. Have a think about those questions. I will be posting them over at betterdadshow.com, so you can check them out for yourself. And you can even leave a comment there if you have anything to say. And just let us know what you think. And we will catch you again next week. I've got one more week with my parents who are visiting from Canada. Really good having them here. It's been 2 years because they live on the other side of the world. We don't see them very often. So really trying to take advantage of as much time as we can while they're here. So this podcast is a value for value podcast. So that means that if it's something that adds value to you, we'd appreciate you sending value back. So you can send that through time, talent, or treasure. If you want to share this, please share it if you think it would benefit others. You can also go over to betterdadshow.com where you can donate if you want to help support the show and the work that I'm doing at it, as well as the work I'm doing with Youth of the Mission, which is also fully volunteer work. So again, thank you very much for tuning in. I'd love to hear some feedback from you, and we will catch you again next week when we will read the chapter 12.